Hi all, I'm going to show you how to use the analytic hierarchy process on WebHIPRE software. And this is a web-based software that's a little bit older, so you would need to set up the right settings for it and so on. And I provided a short video for you to discuss how um, to get the security settings acceptable enough such that the JavaScript from the old software can run through the web. So let's start and let me show you and all the glitches, all the steps and the glitches as we go through it, just in case you encounter some of them, how to use the AHP tool on WebHIPRE. So I'm going to share my screen. And remember, this is the screen here. Remember that what we tried to use as a platform was the Internet Explorer version 10 and not the Microsoft Edge. I don't think you could use this on a non-PC computer unless you have some certain way of running Internet Explorer for the PC on it. So this is the website that we have. And what I'm going to go to, first of all, is to the WebHIPRE website, and that's in here. And what pops up is this little box here, and this is a little Java box that runs the program. If this doesn't pop up, just say bring WebHIPRE to the front by popping up here. But for some reason, it's not accepting the results yet in terms of the connection. And it asks you, do you want to run this application? And your version of the Java is out of date. I do not have to worry about that. I just say run. And then it pops up and this little button here can then start running it. And I'll say start WebHIPRE. And then what pops up is this little window here. And this is essentially the software that you would put all your data in and design. So let me make that bigger into this situation. And the first thing you want to do here, and I think I kind of listed the steps in the sheet of paper, but I'm showing them to you right now. The first thing you want to do is double left click to set up your objective. And let's say our objective is select supplier. And again, that was a left button click, mouse click on there. And then it changes color to say that is the ultimate goal or factor. Now the hierarchy that we're going to use here is going to go in this direction here. So let's assume that there are 3 suppliers. We'll call them supplier 1. Double click, left click, supplier 2. And supplier 3. Oh, I made a mistake here because these are the alternatives. So instead of calling them supplier 1, 2, and 3, let's move them over one step here. And I'm doing that by just clicking on them, moving up one. What we should have before we get into the suppliers, the alternatives, is actually the factors or the criteria that we wish to consider. Quality, I think, could be a criteria. Cost is another criteria. And we can also, and I'll just keep this simple as a 3x3. So the third factor here would be quality, cost, and let's assume flexibility. So we want to be able to evaluate each of these suppliers based on these factors of how quality, how well do they do on cost, how well do they do on flexibility. So what we then try to do is connect these up. And the way we do that is we go from a light blue, left click, and then right click, and the connection to the alternative, at least they call them the alternatives here, these will essentially be factors later. The lowest level is always the alternatives. Factors and subfactors or attributes and sub-attributes will be in the middle. And you'll see that change as well. And again, we just right click and right click. As long as this is dark blue and our right clicks here, they connect up that way. Now, we're also going to say that for each of these factors, the suppliers are going to be compared with a relative comparison. And we do this right click, right click, right click for the quality. We left click on cost and then right click, right click, right click, and then flexibility, right click, right click, right click. And now we have our hierarchy. Notice here, this is criteria set 1, and then you can have sub-criteria here. You can even move these over and add additional sub-criteria. For example, quality could have reliability, durability, aesthetics, different dimensions of the quality of the supplier. Cost can have different cost measures as well. So let me move this down here a little bit just to make this a little bit more even. Then we get into the evaluation, and this is where the pairwise comparisons. So we look at the analysis or the priorities. So let's see here. Well, we want to take a look at the relative ranking of each of these. So we're going to look at, and we're going to double click on supplier selection. And notice what pops up here, a window that asks you what type of weighting technique do you want to use. There's direct, there's smart, there's swing, there's smarter. We're going to use, and this is the direct weighting scheme that we mentioned as a relative scoring. You could just give it a direct weighting and determine which one's best. But we're going to use the AHP technique. Now, if you remember the video on the AHP technique, what you have to do is pairwise comparisons. And what it shows here is a pairwise comparison table. So let's take a look at this. We want to know how much more important is quality than cost, and cost than flexibility, and quality than flexibility. So we ask the question, quality, we have a company here that's very concerned about quality. So we're going to say that quality might actually be a little more important than cost. And the way we do this is just to go in the arrow in the direction of the one that's more important. And I'm going to move this over to, let's say, and if you remember what we said here, we could go from slightly important to slightly preferred to strongly preferred to strongly, very strongly preferred. And we're going to say, we're going to go strongly preferred. The quality is strongly preferred to cost. You go in the middle there as well. So quality is given a 5. So quality is a little bit more or strongly preferred to cost. And then we go on to how much more important is quality than our C factor, which is flexibility in terms of supplier selection. So we click on there and we move that over. And we're going to say that quality, of course, is even more important than flexibility. Quality is our job 1 in this situation. And now we want to make sure that there's a consistency here, or we could just say, well, how much more important is quality than flexibility? And we could say, well, flexibility is a little more important, but realistically, it's actually quality that's a little more important. And we're going to give that a value of 2. And notice here that these are green. This is the consistency matrix, which means that we're being consistent. Notice if we said flexibility was more important, clearly that would be inconsistent to what we have over here. So we're going to do this, and we're just going to give this to do that there, the 2, and we're going to say okay. When we put this last number, before I say okay, when we put this last number in here, the pairwise comparison, we came up with the weighting. So the weightings essentially say that quality has a 0.74 weighting, cost is a 0.167, and flexibility is 0.094. And this essentially tells us the importance ranking of each of the attributes. If we had 100 attributes or sub-attributes, we can do this over and over again as well. But we're going to stop there for the attributes. Say, okay, we have the attributes brought in. Now what we want to do is ask ourselves, how well does each supplier do on each of these metrics? And to do that, we're going to need 3 different matrices. We're going to need a matrix for quality, a matrix comparing suppliers on cost, and a matrix comparing suppliers on flexibility. So let's do the quality. And again, we double click there and we go to AHP and we start filling it in. We're going to say supplier 1 is the weakest in quality, but it's going to be very good in cost and flexibility. So we say supplier 1 is a little bit weaker than supplier 2, which means supplier 2 is slightly preferred to supplier 1 in terms of quality, and supplier 3 is the best one in terms of quality, but they're going to charge a lot of money, and we're going to do that a little bit later as well. And then finally, what we have here is supplier 3 is probably just a little bit better. And notice it's almost a perfect consistency matrix here. And it says 0.6, 0.3, 0.1. Supplier 3 is definitely the best in quality in this situation using these factors. Okay, now let's look at cost. Now, when we go to cost, we're going to say, well, let's see. We'll say supplier 1 and supplier 2 are relatively equal in cost. Okay, we'll give supplier 1 supplier 2 relatively equal in cost and put just a value of 1 there. But supplier 1 is much better in cost than supplier 3. But supplier 2, for some reason, we say, it's only a little bit better, but not that much better. They're almost equal between A and B, but not necessarily between B and C is not the same level. So what we have now is supplier 1 doing better on cost than supplier 2 and supplier 3. Okay, and let's do one on flexibility. Now, when we do it on flexibility, we go to the AHP again. And now we're going to say supplier 1 is actually better than supplier 2 on flexibility as well. Just a little bit better. And supplier 1 is a lot better on flexibility than supplier 3. But supplier 2 is a little bit better than supplier 3 as well. So we're going to do that, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to do this, and we have all the matrices formed right now. Now what we want to do is do the analysis. Remember, we already determined how important each of these is in terms of the supplier selection decision. And then we also determined how well each of these suppliers does on each of these criteria. We're going to do a weighting scheme now. How well do they do and how important is the criteria multiplied together and summed up? We could do that as you saw with the matrices that were shown in the video with MATLAB. We're going to now do a sensitivity analysis. And I'm sorry, a composite priorities. And we're going to do the composite priorities and we come up with these composite priorities. And that's when we bring it all together. Notice this nice little picture here shows that supplier 3 overall has the highest score. And you can look at the scores as text in this way by pressing there and finding out what their scores are and so on. The composite priorities and the overall priorities. The overall priorities show that supplier 3 has a 0.468. Supplier 2 follows and supplier 1 is the last in our comparison here for selecting the supplier. You have global weights, you have local weights, etc. This is what it looks like graphically when you put them all together. Supplier 3 clearly has the greatest quality, and also quality is very important. So it's very red, but we give up a lot on cost and flexibility. Cost, of course, we said that supplier 1 was a little bit better than supplier 2. And flexibility, supplier 1 was a little bit better than supplier 2. But even though supplier 1 was better in terms of cost and flexibility, it couldn't overcome its poor quality. And our company really cares about quality. So our decision here initially is supplier 3. Now, there's a very clear-cut decision, but that's not always the case. So what then you can do is a sensitivity analysis. In this case, we're going to look at select supplier. And we are going to look at how well they do on these sub-criteria. Now, under this case, this is how important it is to select supplier. And what we see here that it's really at 0.74 in terms of quality importance. But what if that decreases? Now, if we keep decreasing it, notice up here on the right-hand side that the numbers are changing. And as we keep decreasing it, supplier 3 keeps getting less and less important. Let's assume that we went from a quality producer to being a price or some other factor focus, but quality reduced in importance to about 20.25, which essentially increased how well the others did. And in that case, supplier 1, when quality is at 0.25 level of importance, and the other two, time and flexibility, remain the same ratio, we see that supplier 1 becomes the best. Does supplier 2 ever become the best? Well, let's look at quality being approximately 0.48. And in this case, supplier 2 never really gets to be the best. It's this green line here. It's always the red line, which is supplier 1, or the blue line. And that's how you do the sensitivity analysis in this situation. Of course, you could look at all these other items and characteristics and determine how well they do when you start changing how well each of the supplier does in terms of quality and what the results are. And you base it on like how supplier 1 changes or supplier 3 changes in terms of how well they do on quality. And that is it for our video.